I was only 8 years old when it all began, but I remember it like yesterday. Today, with these wrinkled hands and legs that aren't as agile, I can tell you how a simple street kid transformed not only the life of a wealthy family, but also her own story. My name is Grace. I'm 78, and this is my story. The city's Central Park buzzed with activity that afternoon. Kids ran between the fountains. Women walked their dogs. Street vendors shouted their offers while the smell of cotton candy floated through the air. I watched it all with big, observant eyes. I'd learned to watch, to pay attention to every detail. That's how I survived on the street since the accident. Sitting on one of the farthest benches in the park, watching everything without being part of anything, was a man. Impeccable suit, gold watch on his wrist, a latest model phone forgotten on his lap. Beside him, in a wheelchair, a girl about my age distractedly stroked a worn-out stuffed animal. Her eyes were big and bright, but a shadow gleamed in them too, the resigned sadness of someone who had stopped dreaming. I watched them for a long time, not like someone planning to ask for change, but like someone who recognizes a familiar pain. That girl and I, despite the social chasm between us, shared something that went beyond appearances. I knew what it was like not to be able to walk. I knew what it felt like to have a body feel like a prison. "It's late, Isabel, let's go," the man said to the girl, who just nodded with a weary movement. That's when I approached, barefoot, in torn clothes, my feet covered in dust. I walked slowly, avoiding the guards and the looks of contempt that always followed me. The man noticed me immediately, frowning. He was used to kids asking for money, surely, and prepared to dismiss me with an impersonal gesture. But I didn't hold out my hand. I didn't offer anything. I didn't ask for change. I just stood before them, head held high, and said in a calm voice that didn't sound like a beggar's, "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Silence fell like a stone between us. The murmurs of the park, the barking, the laughter of other children. Everything seemed to fade. Only my words hung in the air. The man looked at me with a mix of perplexity, mockery, and anger. "What did you say?" he asked, incredulous. "That I can help her," I repeated, firmer this time. "If you let me try." Isabel's eyes widened. She looked at me, fascinated, as if I had spoken a magic formula she had been waiting to hear her whole life. But her father didn't share that hope. He stood up, crossed his arms, and spoke harshly. "Listen, kid. Do you know how many people have promised to cure her? Do you know how many university degrees, how many doctors, how many centers told me the same thing? And you, a dirty kid without shoes, you come to offer me what no one else could?" I didn't move. I didn't lower my gaze. My voice didn't tremble. "Yes, sir, because I don't need degrees. I just need you to trust and let me try." My unexpected boldness disconcerted him. He didn't know how to respond immediately. "Dad," Isabel whispered, touching his hand. He looked at her. His daughter wasn't asking for anything with words, just with that look, a mix of pleading and hope that apparently he hadn't seen in years. "Isabel, we can't waste time," he murmured. What if it wasn't wasted time?" she whispered almost inaudibly. I knew I was risking everything at that moment. I had nowhere to sleep that night. I hadn't eaten since the day before, but something inside me told me that girl needed me as much as I needed her. It wasn't just about the possibility of earning some money. It was about sharing what I had learned, what had saved me. The man hesitated, looking at me again. "What's your name?" "Grace." "And how do you intend to do this, Grace?" I smiled, not an arrogant smile, but a calm, convinced one. "First, I need to see her walk in her mind. Then I'll help her remember it in her body." He snorted, disbelieving. He was going to dismiss me, turn away, drag his daughter back to his sterile and perfect life. But then he saw her eyes. They were shining. They were shining like, I could tell. He hadn't seen them shine since before the accident. And he understood something. It wasn't just my promise that mattered. It was the spark of faith I had ignited in his daughter. The man sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and said, I'll give you an hour, Grace. I nodded without fear, without hesitation, as if I had waited my whole life for that opportunity. And so, in the middle of the noisy park, among indifferent people and hurried steps, a story began that no one could imagine. A story where a shoeless beggar would forever change the destiny of a millionaire and his daughter. The granted hour was ticking away. In a quieter corner of the park, under the shade of an oak tree, the man, whose name I now knew, was Mr. Harrison, watched everything standing, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and brow furrowed. Beside him, Isabel remained seated in her wheelchair. In front of them, barefoot and in a patched shirt, I was preparing whatever it was I was preparing. I had picked up branches from the ground, arranged pebbles as if they were lines or markers, and spread out an old cloth bag as if it were a sacred mat. My movements were calm, almost ritualistic. Mr. Harrison huffed impatiently. "Is this a joke? Are you going to do street magic or something?" I didn't answer. I just kept working, in silence. Isabel, on the other hand, was fascinated. Her eyes gleamed as she followed my every move, as if she understood something her father couldn't see. Finally, I approached her and knelt beside her. "Does anything hurt right now?" I asked softly. Isabel shook her head. "No, I don't feel anything. Not even when they touch me." "It's okay," I said. "That can change." Mr. Harrison crossed his arms, suspicious. "Now you're a doctor too?" I looked at him directly in the eyes. "No, but I learned things. A man taught me. I lived with him in a vacant lot near the old city hospital. He was a doctor, even if no one believed him." Mr. Harrison didn't answer. He just watched, not knowing if he was facing a precocious con artist or something more. I took a small, smooth black stone from my pocket that shone slightly in the light. I gave it to Isabel. "Hold it firmly. Think of a time when you were walking, a happy moment, when you felt free." Isabel closed her eyes. Mr. Harrison took a step forward, but I paid no attention to his protective movement. I sat in front of her, both of us face to face, and closed my eyes too. Mr. Harrison, with a hardened expression, didn't understand anything, but he couldn't look away. Minutes passed. I spoke very softly, whispers, scattered phrases. "Now you're in a park. There's wind. Your hair is moving. You feel the grass. Your feet touch the ground. Do you feel that? You're running. You're jumping. You're alive." Isabel had tears in her eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from a memory returning, from a body that, although still, remembered what it was like to fly. "How are you doing this?" she whispered. "Your body listens to what your soul believes," I replied. "Mr." Harrison leaned against the back of a nearby bench. He didn't understand anything, but something was happening. The girl opened her eyes. Her cheeks were wet. "I felt my feet," she said. "For a second, I swear I felt them." The world seemed to stop. Mr. Harrison walked towards us, swallowing. "What did you do?" I stood up. "Nothing she couldn't do herself. I just reminded her who she was." Mr. Harrison looked at me, confused, irritated, but also intrigued. "This isn't science." "No," I replied. "It's faith." Isabel raised her hand and placed it on mine. "Can you come tomorrow?" I smiled. "If they let me, yes." Mr. Harrison hesitated. He looked at his daughter, looked at me, looked at that stone she still held between her fingers, and then sighed. "1 more hour tomorrow. That's it." I nodded. I bent down, gathered my bag and branches, turned and walked away barefoot through the crowd. Isabel followed me with her gaze. In silence, Mr. Harrison remained still. He didn't know why he had agreed. He just knew that afternoon, for the first time in a long time, his daughter had smiled without him having to pay for it, and that was priceless. I remember walking through the crowd that afternoon, feeling the sharp stone on the sole of my foot, but also feeling something else, a purpose. That girl with the sad eyes had awakened a feeling in me that wasn't pity or compassion. It was recognition. I had been her, and someone had taught me to believe again in my legs, in my body, in myself. That night, I slept under a bridge. I wasn't hungry, even though I hadn't eaten. I had a flame inside me that not even the cold night could extinguish. Dr. Evans, my savior, my teacher, had once told me, "Grace, what we learn isn't ours. It's a gift we must pass on." And now, finally, I had found someone to pass it to. At that time, I didn't know that while I slept, clutching my few belongings under a starry sky, Mr. Harrison was spending the night investigating who I was. The coffee steamed in the porcelain cup on his desk, untouched. He sifted through police files, hospital records, private databases, trying to discover my identity. What he discovered that night would change everything, not just for Isabel or for me, but for him too. The name Grace Miller appeared in a file. Estimated age, 8 years old. No school records, no official documents. Background, orphan child. Lost her parents in a car accident 3 years before. Accident location, Interstate 95, near mile marker 115. Deceased, Sarah Miller and James Peterson. Sole survivor, their 5-year-old daughter, Grace. That name felt too familiar to Mr. Harrison. An old file, archived years ago. One he himself had ordered closed with money and lawyers. The Miller case, a married couple killed when their car was hit by a driver from his company, drunk, on a stormy night. I didn't know this at the time. I would only know much later, when the wounds were already beginning to heal, when the words could finally come out without so much weight. But that morning when I returned to the park, I noticed something different in Mr. Harrison's gaze. It wasn't just distrust or skepticism. It was something deeper, more unsettling. He had kept his word. He was there, with Isabel, waiting for me near the bench under the oak tree. Isabel held the black stone in her hand and smiled when she saw me. "You came," she exclaimed, with a joy that didn't seem to belong to someone who had given up on walking. "I promised I would," I replied, approaching calmly. That day our work was different. I asked Isabel to close her eyes and meticulously described how the body moves when walking. It wasn't just about muscles or bones, things that I, a street kid, wouldn't know the technical names for. It was about feeling, remembering, reimagining. I talked about toes pushing off the ground, the heel touching first, then the sole, then the toes. I talked about the knee bending slightly, the hips swaying, the arms moving in rhythm. As I spoke, Isabel subtly moved her toes. They were almost imperceptible movements, but they were there. Mr. Harrison watched it all in silence, his eyes alternating between my concentrated face and his daughter's subtly trembling feet. "How do you know these things?" he asked finally. I stopped and looked at him. It was a look no 8-year-old should have, a look from someone who had already lived an entire lifetime. "Because I was also in a wheelchair, Mr. Harrison." He paled. "What?" "After the accident, I couldn't move my legs. The doctors at the hospital said I would never walk again. But Dr. Evans found me. He taught me to feel again, to believe, to try. And one day, my feet responded." Mr. Harrison swallowed. He knew more than I imagined. "Where is this doctor now?" "In his makeshift clinic, helping others. People no one else helps." There was a heavy silence. Isabel looked from me to her father, sensing there was something in that conversation she didn't fully understand. "Dad," she finally said. "Look." She had managed to move her right foot in a full circle, something she hadn't done in years. Mr. Harrison's voice trembled slightly as he asked, "How did you do that, Isabel?" "I just thought, like Grace said. I thought I could. And then I could." Mr. Harrison seemed torn between the joy of seeing his daughter progress and something else, something I would only understand much later: guilt. That day at the end of our session, he called me aside while Isabel was distracted. "Grace," he said in a low voice, "I'd like you to come to our house tomorrow to continue the treatment in a more suitable environment." I looked at him, surprised. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect a man like him to invite me into his world. "Do you live far?" "In the North End. I'll send a driver to pick you up." "Where can I find you?" I hesitated. I didn't have an address to give. I didn't have a home. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my small bag of stones and herbs. "I'll be here," I said, pointing to the bench. "Tomorrow morning." He nodded, a short, controlled gesture. It wasn't kindness I saw in his eyes. It was something more complex. I said goodbye to Isabel with a smile and a gentle touch on her hand. She held my hand a moment longer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." "No," I replied. "Thank you for believing in yourself." I left. As I walked away, I felt Mr. Harrison's gaze on my back. Intense, penetrating, full of unasked questions. I didn't know then, but he was experiencing an internal earthquake. He had just invited the daughter of the people his company had killed into his home, and she, unknowingly, was healing his daughter. That night, I returned to the vacant lot where Dr. Evans had his clinic. It was a place most people would avoid, an abandoned lot with a makeshift structure of corrugated metal and plastic. But for me, and for many other forgotten people in the city, it was a beacon of hope. Old Dr. Miller greeted me with a smile through his white, unkempt beard. "Grace, I thought you weren't coming back today. Where were you?" I told him about Isabel, about Mr. Harrison, about the invitation to the mansion. As I spoke, I saw the old doctor's expression change. "Harrison," he murmured. "Mr. Harrison, the businessman." I nodded. He took a deep breath, his sunken eyes lost in some distant thought. "Grace, do you know who he is?" he finally asked. "A rich man with a daughter who can't walk," I replied simply. Dr. Miller shook his head. "He's much more than that, little one. You don't remember because you were too young when it happened, but Mr. Harrison is the owner of the company whose driver killed your parents." The world seemed to drop away beneath my feet. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. "What? Is it him? Are you sure?" "I am. I followed the case in the newspapers." It was quickly silenced. He paid a fortune to quiet the press and avoid a scandal. It never went to trial. I sat on the dusty ground, trying to process that information. The man who had invited me to his house, the father of the girl I was helping, was indirectly responsible for me being a street orphan. "What should I do?" I whispered. Dr. Miller sat beside me, his old knees creaking as he bent down. "What does your heart say, little one?" I closed my eyes. Inside me there was a storm of conflicting emotions. Rage, sadness, confusion. But above all, I saw Isabel's face, her eyes shining when she felt her feet for the first time in years. "It's not her fault," I finally said. "She's like I was." Dr. Miller smiled, his wrinkled eyes shining with emotion. "And that's why, Grace, you are special. Many would use this knowledge to seek revenge, but you see beyond the pain." He took my small hands in his, rough and aged. "What you are doing for that girl isn't just about her. Do you understand? It's about you too. It's about healing." I nodded slowly, only partially understanding what he meant. Only much later would I fully understand the wisdom of those words. The next morning, a luxurious car stopped in the park. The driver, a man in a suit who seemed uncomfortable with my appearance, asked for my name. When I confirmed it, he opened the back door without hiding his disapproval and motioned for me to get in. The car drove through streets I had never been on. Gradually, the city changed. The buildings became taller, the sidewalks cleaner, the trees better maintained. We arrived at a neighborhood of mansions with high walls. The car stopped in front of an imposing gate that opened electronically. "Is this where Mr. Harrison lives?" I asked, unable to hide my astonishment. The driver just nodded, still avoiding looking directly at me. Upon entering the property, I was speechless. The garden was bigger than the entire Central Park, with perfectly trimmed trees and colorful flowers in geometric designs. The house, or rather the palace, stood imposing, with white columns and gleaming windows. Mr. Harrison and Isabel were waiting at the entrance. Isabel waved cheerfully from her wheelchair. Mr. Harrison maintained a controlled expression, but I noticed something different on his face, a tension that wasn't there before. "Welcome, Grace," Isabel said with a smile. I approached them, aware of my appearance. My dirty feet left prints on the immaculate stone path. "We prepared a place to work," Mr. Harrison said, his tone formal. "In the greenhouse." I followed them to a large glass greenhouse at the back of the house. The atmosphere was incredible, full of exotic plants, with abundant light streaming in through the glass panels. There was an open central space, with a thin mat spread on the floor. "This place is perfect," I said, amazed by the beauty and energy of the space. That day's session was different. In the greenhouse, with the humid heat and the scent of plants, Isabel seemed more relaxed. I started with the same visualization exercises, but soon moved towards more physical work. "Can I touch your legs?" I asked. Isabel nodded. I placed my hands on her knees and began massaging them gently, using techniques Dr. Miller had taught me. Circular movements that stimulated circulation and awakened sensation. "Do you feel this?" I asked. "A little like tingling." "That's good," I smiled. "It means your nerves are waking up." We worked for over an hour. Mr. Harrison observed everything from a distance, in silence. Occasionally, I saw him taking notes in a small notebook. What I didn't know was that he was comparing my methods with everything specialized doctors had tried without success. By the end of the session, Isabel managed to move both feet consciously, rotating them in slow circles. It was small progress for someone observing from the outside, but immense for someone who knew her previous condition. "Do you want to try something else?" I asked. Feeling we were at a good point, Isabel looked at her father, seeking approval. He nodded cautiously. "We're going to try and feel the weight of your body," I explained. "It's not about trying to stand up yet, just to remember what it's like to feel the pressure on your feet." With Mr. Harrison's help, we positioned Isabel on a small inclined platform I improvised, with her body slightly leaning forward. Her feet touched the ground, but without bearing all her weight. "What do you feel?" I asked. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Weight. Pressure. It's strange. I forgot what it was like. "It's like riding a bike," I said. "The body remembers, even when the mind forgets." We worked on that exercise for a few more minutes until I noticed the tiredness on her face. It was important not to overdo it. "That's enough for today," I said. "You were amazing, Isabel." When we were finishing, a middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's uniform entered the greenhouse. She looked at me with a mix of disdain and suspicion that I knew all too well. "Lunch is served, sir," she announced, addressing Mr. Harrison but keeping her eyes on me. "Thank you, Mary," Mr. Harrison replied. Then, to my surprise, he added, "Set one more place at the table. Grace will be joining us for lunch." The housekeeper couldn't hide her astonishment. A place for the child, sir?" "Yes, Mary, for the child." I ate the best lunch of my life that day. The table was huge, with plates and cutlery I didn't even know what they were for. Isabel laughed softly at my confusion, not cruelly, but with a kind of charm, and explained which fork to use, for what. Mr. Harrison remained silent, observing our interaction. There were moments when he thought he wasn't being watched. His eyes filled with deep sadness when he looked at me. I sensed it, but pretended not to notice. After lunch, Mr. Harrison called me to his study. It was an imposing room, with shelves full of books and a desk of dark, polished wood. "Grace," he began, closing the door, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be absolutely honest with me." I nodded, not looking away. "Do you know who I am? Besides Isabel's father?" I hesitated. I knew what Dr. Miller had told me. I knew this man was connected to my parents' death, but something told me that the truth, at that moment, was important. "I know that a driver from your company caused the accident that killed my parents," I replied with a calm that surprised even myself. "Dr. Miller told me yesterday." Mr. Harrison closed his eyes for an instant, as if absorbing a blow. "And yet, you came. And yet, you're helping my daughter. Why?" It was a question I had already asked myself throughout the previous night. The answer came naturally. "Because it's not her fault. because I know what it's like to be trapped in a body that doesn't obey, and because Dr. Miller taught me that healing is not just receiving help, but also giving it. Mr. Harrison looked at me intensely, as if trying to understand how an 8-year-old girl could speak with such wisdom. "Do you hate me?" he asked softly. It was such a sincere, vulnerable question coming from such a powerful man that it surprised me. "I don't know you well enough to hate you," I replied honestly. "I just know that your daughter needs help, and I can help her." He stood up, walked to the window, and stood there in silence for a while, looking at the garden where Isabel was being pushed in her chair by one of the staff. "Grace," he finally said without turning, "do you have somewhere to stay? Where do you live?" "Sometimes I sleep at Dr. Miller's clinic, sometimes under the river bridge." He turned to me, his face a mask of contained pain. "I'd like you to stay here. We have many rooms. You could continue working with Isabel daily. It would be better for the treatment." I knew it wasn't just for the treatment. There was something else. Perhaps remorse. Perhaps a desire for reparation. Perhaps simply the human instinct to help those who help us. "I would be honored," I replied, with a formality that didn't belong to a street kid, but that I learned by observing the city's important people. "Perfect," he said, seeming genuinely relieved. "Mary will show you to a room, and tomorrow we'll go buy some new clothes for you." I didn't know how to react. New clothes? A room of my own? It seemed an impossible dream for a kid who slept under bridges. Can I let Dr. Miller know? He'll worry if I don't come back." Mr. Harrison nodded. "Of course. I'll send a driver to take you there this afternoon. And if you'd like, your doctor can also come visit you here." It was a gesture of conciliation. I sensed even being so young. A bridge between worlds that should never have met, but that fate had intertwined in mysterious ways. That night I slept in a bed for the first time in 3 years. The room was simple compared to the rest of the mansion, probably meant for staff, but for me it was a palace. Clean sheets, a soft pillow, hot water in the bathroom. I cried in silence, not from sadness but from an emotion so deep I couldn't even name it. Thinking back now, 7 decades later, I realized that night was the beginning of a new life for me. Not just because of the material comfort, but because something began to heal inside me. Something beyond my legs that had already recovered physically, but that still carried the invisible weight of loss, abandonment, anger. The days that followed were a delicate dance between different worlds. In the morning, Mary, the housekeeper who didn't hide her disapproval, would knock on my door with new, clean clothes. At first I refused, clinging to my old clothes that, although worn, were the last things left from my previous life. But Isabel insisted so much that I finally gave in. "You look like a princess," she said, smiling, when she saw me in a simple but new dress. "I'm not a princess," I replied, uncomfortable with the change. "I'm just Grace, and that's more than enough," a voice said from behind us. It was Mr. Harrison, watching us from the doorway. There was a different shine in his eyes, something that wasn't pity or remorse, but something closer to respect. Therapy sessions with Isabel continued in the greenhouse. We progressed slowly, but with a consistency that began to attract the attention of even the most skeptical in the house. With my simple techniques of visualization, massage, and adapted exercises that Dr. Miller had taught me, combined with Isabel's fierce will, we began to see real progress. A week after my arrival at the Harrison mansion, Isabel managed to stand for 10 seconds, supported by the parallel bars we improvised with chairs. It wasn't a long time, but for someone who hadn't held her own weight in years, it was an extraordinary victory. Mr. Harrison, who witnessed everything, couldn't contain his emotion. I saw a powerful man cry for the first time in my life. A silent, discreet, but deep cry. He approached us and, without words, hugged his daughter, and then, to my surprise, me too. "Thank you," he whispered. Dr. Miller began visiting us regularly. At first, the mansion staff looked at him with the same disdain they directed at me. But Mr. Harrison's authority didn't allow for open comments. The old doctor brought herbs, old anatomy books, and complimented my work with his wisdom. "You're doing extraordinary work, Grace," he told me one day, as we watched Isabel practicing her exercises. "You're healing much more than just her legs." "What do you mean?" "Look at her. Look at her father. There are more forms of paralysis than physical." It was true. The entire mansion seemed to be thawing little by little. Isabel laughed more, talked more. Mr. Harrison spent more time at home, less obsessed with his business. Even some staff began to look at me with less hostility, although Mary, the housekeeper, remained inflexible in her distrust. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. On the 10th day, during a particularly intensive session, something went wrong. Isabel was trying to take a step without support when her body gave way. She fell, hitting her knee hard on the floor, and let out a cry of pain that echoed through the greenhouse. I ran to help her, but before I could reach her, Mary appeared at the door, drawn by the scream, her face contorted with fury at seeing Isabel fallen. "What have you done to her?" she screamed, advancing towards me. "Nothing. It was an accident. She's making progress and..." "Progress? You're hurting her." "I knew it. I warned Mr. Harrison." Mr. Harrison arrived shortly after, alarmed by the screams. Mary immediately turned to him, pointing at me. "Sir, this child is playing with your daughter's health. Look what has happened. We need real doctors, not a..." She hesitated but finished with venom. "Beggar who thinks she's a healer." I felt as if I had been slapped. I looked at Mr. Harrison, waiting for his reaction. His face was pale, torn between worry for Isabel and something else I couldn't identify. "Mary, call Dr. Thompson," he finally said, referring to the doctor who had always treated Isabel. "And you, Grace. Perhaps it's best we stop for today." It wasn't an expulsion, but it felt like one. I nodded in silence, swallowing the humiliation. Isabel, still on the floor, held my hand. "It wasn't her fault, Dad," she said with surprising firmness. "I wanted to try. I insisted. Grace even said we should go slower, but I wanted it so much." Her eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, I realized, but from frustration. Mr. Harrison knelt beside his daughter, assessing the wound on her knee. It was nothing serious, just a scrape, but the incident had shaken the fragile trust we had been building. Dr. Thompson arrived an hour later, a middle-aged man, thin glasses, impeccable suit, and a perpetually stern expression. He examined Isabel meticulously, asking her technical questions and shooting disapproving glances at me when my name was mentioned. "Mr. Harrison," he finally said, when we were all gathered in his study, me in a corner, trying to look invisible. "I understand your experiment with alternative methods, but I must warn you that what is being done here is, at the very least, medically irresponsible." "But she is improving," Mr. Harrison argued. "You yourself have seen the progress. Temporary progress, perhaps. Momentary neuromuscular stimulation. But without scientific basis, without solid medical foundations, and more importantly, with significant risks." He looked directly at me. "This child has no medical training. She is playing doctor with your daughter, Mr. Harrison, and today we have seen the result." I lowered my head, feeling the weight of each word like a stone. He was right, wasn't he? Who was I, after all? A street kid without education, without formal knowledge, just with the techniques a discredited old doctor had taught me. "I strongly recommend you interrupt this experiment," Thompson continued. "We can resume conventional treatment with qualified professionals." There was a heavy silence. I looked at Mr. Harrison, awaiting his decision. His face was tense, conflicted. Finally, he spoke. "I appreciate your opinion, Doctor, but I'd like to remind you that Isabel went through 3 years of conventional treatment without any significant progress. In 2 weeks with Grace, she has managed to stand up, This is not a coincidence. Thompson frowned, clearly annoyed. Let's do this, Mr. Harrison proposed. Grace will continue working with Isabel, but under medical supervision. Yours, if you're willing. A hybrid approach, shall we say? It was a smart compromise, neither fully yielding to the traditional doctor nor removing me from the treatment. Thompson didn't seem satisfied, but reluctantly agreed. That night, alone in my room, I cried as I hadn't cried since the accident that took my parents. Not because of the humiliation from Mary or Dr. Thompson's words, but from the fear of failing. Failing Isabel, failing Mr. Harrison, failing Dr. Miller, and most importantly, failing myself. A soft knock on the door interrupted my crying. It was Isabel, in her wheelchair, with a book on her lap. "Can I come in?" she asked shyly. I quickly wiped my tears and nodded. She came in, skillfully maneuvering the chair. "You were crying." It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer. Isabel held out the book to me. "I brought you something." It was a photo album. I opened it carefully and saw pictures of Isabel. Early years, birthdays, Christmases. And then, the sequence stopped abruptly. "The accident was here," she explained, pointing to the last page with photos. "After that, they didn't want to photograph me anymore. As if I had disappeared." I understood what she meant. The wheelchair had transformed her into a ghost, present but not fully visible. "But since you arrived," she continued, turning to the following pages which were empty, "I feel like I can fill these pages again. Do you understand? You're not just helping me walk, Grace. You're helping me exist again." Her words, so simple and so profound, struck me deeply. Suddenly, my fears and doubts seemed small compared to what was at stake. The life of a girl who, like me, just wanted the chance to be seen, to fully exist. "Let's keep filling those pages then," I said, holding her small hand in mine. Isabel smiled, a smile that could light up the whole world. "Promise you won't give up? Even when the grown-ups say you don't know what you're doing?" "I promise," I replied, with all the solemnity my 8 years could muster. "I won't give up on you, Isabel. Never." She leaned in and hugged me, a hug that crossed barriers of class, experience, pain. We were just two girls, united by the same desire, to overcome limits that others had imposed on us. The next morning, the therapy session was different. Dr. Thompson was present, observing every movement, every instruction I gave. His presence was intimidating, but I decided to ignore him and focus only on Isabel. "Today," I told her, "we are going to learn to fall." Both Thompson and Mr. Harrison, who was also attending, looked at me perplexed. "Learn to fall?" the doctor questioned, skeptical. "Yes," I confirmed, undeterred. "One of the biggest barriers for Isabel is the fear of falling. So if she learns to fall correctly, without getting hurt, that fear will lessen." It was something Dr. Miller had taught me. Before walking again, I had to learn to deal with the inevitable falls. I prepared mats on the floor and showed Isabel how to fall in a controlled way, how to position her arms, how to roll, to distribute the impact. We practiced several times with her falling from increasingly higher positions. What began as a tense exercise gradually transformed into something almost fun. Isabel laughed every time she managed to fall and get up again. By the end of the session, Thompson was visibly impressed, although he tried not to show it. "Interesting approach," he murmured, taking notes. "Desensitization to the fear of falling. I had never thought of it." In the following days, we established a working rhythm that combined my intuitive techniques with some of Dr. Thompson's more scientific suggestions. To my surprise, some of them actually helped, like specific exercises to strengthen certain muscle groups or the use of mild electrical stimulation to awaken dormant nerves. The initial barrier between us, the street kid and the renowned doctor, began to soften. We weren't friends, nor would we be, but we developed a mutual respect for Isabel's well-being. 2 weeks after the falling incident, the moment we had all been waiting for arrived. Isabel was stronger, more confident, The visualization exercises, combined with daily physical training and therapeutic massages, had produced remarkable results. It was time to try taking the first real step. It was a small ceremony, but charged with emotion. In the greenhouse, Mr. Harrison, Dr. Thompson, Dr. Miller, who had been specially invited for the moment, Mary, who, although still distrustful, had witnessed the progress, and I gathered around Isabel. We set up 2 parallel bars, low enough for her to hold on to comfortably. I helped her position herself at the end of them, her feet firmly planted on the ground, her hands holding the bars. "Remember," I told her, "it's not about getting to the end. It's about trying. One step is already a victory." Isabel took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the path in front of her. There was a determination on her face I had never seen before. Something fierce, untamed. "I'm ready," she said. And then, slowly, with absolute concentration, she moved her right foot forward, a small, hesitant but real step. Her legs trembled with the effort, but she held steady. One more step, and another. No one spoke. The silence was absolute, broken only by Isabel's heavy breathing and the faint shuffle of her feet on the floor. She reached the halfway point, 3 full steps, when her strength began to fail. But before she could fall, she steadied herself on the bars and smiled, a smile of pure triumph. "I walked," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I walked." The greenhouse erupted in tears and applause. Mr. Harrison ran to hug his daughter, lifting her into his arms as if she were a feather. Dr. Thompson seemed genuinely amazed, even taking off his glasses to wipe away hidden tears. Dr. Miller smiled serenely, like someone witnessing the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. Even Mary let out a choked sob. And I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. It was as if the entire weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. Isabel had taken her first steps, not thanks to expensive machines or experimental treatments in foreign clinics, but thanks to simple faith, a humble method, and a connection between 2 souls that fate had brought together in the most improbable ways. Mr. Harrison approached me, still carrying Isabel. For a moment I thought he was going to hug me, but he did something even more surprising. He placed his daughter in my arms, a gesture of such absolute trust that it left me speechless. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You have given us back hope." Isabel in my arms hugged me tightly. "No, Grace," she whispered in my ear. "You have given me back to myself." In that moment, there in the greenhouse, flooded by the golden light of sunset, amidst applause and tears, I understood what Dr. Miller had tried to teach me. True healing is not just recovering what was lost, but discovering something new and deeper in the process. Isabel was learning to walk again, yes, but I was learning to forgive, to believe, to belong. And that, I realized, even being so young, was the greatest miracle of all. The months that followed were of hard work, small victories, and occasional setbacks. Isabel's journey to fully regain her movement wasn't linear. There were days of impressive progress, followed by days of frustration and fatigue. But one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The girl who had once resigned herself to a life in a wheelchair now fought with fierce determination to conquer every inch of independence. And I was by her side, day after day, learning as much as I taught. Dr. Thompson, against all expectations, became a reluctant ally. He taught me medical terminology, basic anatomy, rehabilitation principles that complemented my more intuitive approach. In return, I showed him how emotional connection, faith, and Dr. Miller's simple techniques could accelerate recovery in a way that conventional medicine couldn't fully explain. "It's as if you can speak directly to her body," he commented once, watching me work. "As if there's a language only the 2 of you understand." "Perhaps there is," I replied. "Perhaps because we both know what it's like to be trapped." He didn't answer, but I saw in his eyes that he understood. Not completely, but enough. Mr. Harrison also changed during that period. The rigid, controlling man I met in the park had given way to someone more reflective, more present. He actively participated in Isabel's therapy, learning exercises to practice with her during the hours I wasn't there. And to my surprise, he began to take an interest in my education. "You're too smart not to have a formal education, Grace," he told me one day, as I was reading one of the anatomy books Dr. Thompson had lent me. "I'd like to hire private tutors for you." I was speechless at the proposal. "Tutors? For me?" "Yes. You could study right here, in the mansion. Math, science, literature, languages, whatever you want to learn." I didn't know what to say. The idea of having access to formal knowledge, something that had always seemed an unattainable luxury, was almost overwhelming. "Why would you do that for me?" I finally asked. Mr. Harrison looked towards the window, at the garden where Isabel was practicing with her new crutches. "Because you have given us a priceless gift, and because," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "because I have a debt to you that I can never fully repay, but I can try." I accepted the offer, and so at 9 years old I began my formal education. Mornings were dedicated to working with Isabel, afternoons to my studies. I learned avidly, absorbing knowledge like a dry sponge absorbs water. Reading, which I already knew rudimentarily thanks to Dr. Miller, became my passion. Numbers, once mysterious, revealed themselves as a fascinating language. And sciences opened up an entirely new world of understanding about the human body, nature, the universe. "You learn faster than any child I've ever taught," commented my science tutor, a kind lady named Dr. Evans. "It's as if you've been waiting for this your whole life." Perhaps that was the case. Perhaps the girl who had lost everything so early had created an empty space within herself, ready to be filled with something greater than her pain. It was also during that period that my relationship with Mr. Harrison deepened in unexpected ways. We never spoke directly about the accident that killed my parents. It was still a very sensitive wound for both of us. But little by little, through small gestures and indirect conversations, we began to build a kind of mutual understanding. One night I found him in his study, bent over old documents. When he noticed my presence, he didn't hide them. "These are the accident reports," he explained, gesturing for me to come closer. "About your parents." I hesitated, but curiosity prevailed. I sat beside him and looked at the papers. Police reports, testimonies, photographs. I quickly looked away from. "Why are you looking at this now?" I asked. "Because I never really looked at it before," he replied quietly. "At the time, I just wanted the problem to disappear. I paid lawyers to handle everything, silenced the press, closed the case. I never really thought about the people affected." We remained in silence for a long moment. "Your parents were good people, Grace," he continued. "Your father was a music teacher at a public school. Your mother worked with crafts. They were returning from a cultural festival when..." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. We knew what had happened. "What happened to the driver?" I asked. It was a question I had never managed to ask Dr. Miller. Mr. Harrison sighed heavily. "He was fired. He posted bail and was released. He did community service for a few months. The company, my company, paid compensation to close the case quickly. And me, why didn't anyone look for me?" It was the question that had tormented me most for years. Why, after the accident, had I been simply forgotten? Mr. Harrison closed his eyes, as if the answer physically hurt him. "At first, you were in the hospital, unconscious. There were no close relatives to claim you. When you recovered physically, not your legs, but the other injuries, you were transferred to a state shelter. But there were bureaucratic complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that happen when a powerful company wants a case to disappear," he said with evident bitterness. "My lawyers did what lawyers do. They made sure there were no connections between the company and you to avoid future lawsuits. You just fell through the cracks of the system. The reality of those words was overwhelming. It hadn't just been the accident or the loss of my parents that had put me on the streets. It had been a system deliberately designed to forget me, to erase my existence as inconvenient evidence. "I am so sorry, Grace," Mr. Harrison said, and for the first time since I met him, I saw tears stream freely down his face. "There are no excuses for what I did, or rather, for what I failed to do. But if I could go back..." I raised my hand, interrupting him. I didn't want to hear hypotheses about the past. What was done was done. What mattered was the present, the future. And in that present, something extraordinary was happening. 2 lives shattered by a single tragic event were, in some way, healing each other. "We can't change the past," I said, with a wisdom that surprised myself. "But we can decide what to do with what's left of it." Mr. Harrison looked at me with a mix of admiration and astonishment. How could a 9-year-old girl speak with such depth? But he didn't know. No one really knew how much pain and loneliness can mature a soul. "What do you want, Grace?" he asked finally. "From me? From this place? From life? What do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked me. What did I want? Until then, my existence had been governed by the need to survive, by the desires and expectations of others. I had never allowed myself to want something for myself. "I want to keep helping Isabel," I replied after thinking. "I want to learn everything I can. And one day, I want to help other kids like us. Kids who were forgotten, abandoned, who think they are broken forever." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. "Then that's what we'll do," he said with renewed determination. Together, that conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. We were no longer just the millionaire and the beggar, the guilty and the victim. We were 2 human beings trying to rebuild something from the ruins of a shared tragedy. Isabel's progress continued with ups and downs. 11 months after my arrival, she could walk small distances without support, hesitant steps, a little unsteady, but independent. When she turned 10, for her party, she asked for only one gift: to walk alone to the cake table. It was a moment of absolute suspense. The entire mansion, staff, doctors, tutors, and even some executives from Mr. Harrison's company, gathered in the main hall. Isabel, wearing a beautiful sky blue dress, started at the door, supported by her lightweight crutches. At the other end of the hall, about 50 feet away, was the birthday cake, shimmering with 10 lit candles. "You can do it," I whispered in her ear before she started. "Remember, one step at a time. No rush." She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. Then, under everyone's watchful gaze, she let go of the crutches. There was a collective gasp as she wavered slightly, but she soon regained her balance, and she began to walk. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The entire hall held its breath. Isabel moved slowly, concentrating on each movement. Halfway there, she had a moment of hesitation, her legs visibly trembling. Instinctively, I stepped forward to help her, but Mr. Harrison gently held my arm. "Wait," he murmured. "She needs to do it herself." He was right. Isabel took a deep breath, composed herself, and continued. The last few feet were a test of pure determination. When she finally reached the table, a roar of joy erupted in the room. People applauded, cried, hugged each other. Mr. Harrison ran to his daughter, hugging her carefully, as if she might break. Dr. Thompson, usually so reserved, couldn't hide the astonishment on his face. Dr. Miller, now a frequent and respected visitor at the mansion, just smiled serenely. And I stayed where I was, watching the scene with a whirlwind of emotions. Pride, joy, gratitude, but also, I must admit, a pang of melancholy, because I knew that, as Isabel grew stronger, my constant presence would become less necessary. And what would become of me then? As if reading my thoughts, Isabel looked over her father's shoulder at me and held out her hand. "Come, Grace. You have to be here too." I walked towards them, aware of all eyes on me, some with admiration, some with curiosity, some still, like Mary's, with persistent distrust. Isabel held my hand when I got closer, and Mr. Harrison extended his arm, including me in the family hug. "Grace," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "without you, this moment wouldn't exist. You are part of this family now. You always will be." Those words, spoken publicly, were like balm to the fear that was quietly growing inside me. The fear of, once my task was fulfilled, being forgotten again. The party continued, full of joy and celebration. Isabel, although tired from the effort, insisted on staying standing as long as possible, alternating between using her crutches and taking a few steps without support. Her face shone with a confidence she had never possessed before. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, Mr. Harrison called me to his study again. He seemed nervous, almost hesitant, a rare expression for a man so used to being in charge. "Grace," he began, after asking me to sit down, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." I nodded, waiting. These past few months have changed everything, not just for Isabel, but for me too. You've brought something into this house that cannot be measured or bought. He paused, carefully choosing his next words. I wonder if you would consider staying permanently, not just as Isabel's therapist, but as part of the family." I was stunned. I couldn't fully understand what he was proposing. "What do you mean, Mr. Harrison?" He took a deep breath. "I'd like to legally adopt you, Grace. Be your legal guardian. Give you my last name, if you wish." The world seemed to stop around me. Adoption? Family. These were words I had stopped dreaming of a long time ago. Words that belonged to a parallel universe, not mine. The universe of the street kid, the solitary survivor. "But why?" was all I could say. Mr. Harrison smiled sadly. "For many reasons. Because you deserve a home, security, a family. Because Isabel loves you like the sister she never had. Because," his voice faltered slightly, "because you are the daughter I lost due to negligence once, and whom fate, in its mysterious wisdom, brought back into my life." Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision. It was too much to process, too much to feel, all at once. What if I'm not good enough?" I whispered my deepest fear. Mr. Harrison knelt before me, taking my small hands in his. "Grace, you are more than good enough. You are extraordinary, and nothing you do or fail to do will change the fact that you deserve to be loved. You deserve to belong." I cried then. I cried like a child, which I was after all. I cried for my lost parents, for years of loneliness, for a future I never thought possible. And when the tears finally stopped, I looked at the man kneeling in front of me, the man who, by fate or chance, had been an instrument of both my greatest pain and my greatest opportunity for redemption. "Yes," I finally said, "I would like that." The formal adoption took time to process. There were legal complications, lost documents, endless bureaucracy. But Mr. Harrison was persistent, using his influence and resources to untangle the knots the system had created around me. During that time, the dynamic in the mansion subtly changed. I was no longer the little healer or the street kid. I was Grace, the future official member of the Harrison family. The staff slowly began to treat me with new respect. Even Mary, the housekeeper, gradually softened her hostility, although we never became completely close. Isabel continued to progress. With daily dedication and the support of a therapy program that combined my techniques with conventional ones, she went from crutches to a lightweight cane, and finally began taking short walks without any support. Her spine, once curved by years of immobility, straightened. Her muscles, once atrophied, began to define with constant use. It wasn't all easy, of course. There were bad days, when pain or fatigue made her regress. There were moments of frustration, of tears, of wanting to give up. But before every obstacle, we found a way to overcome it together. One afternoon, almost 2 years after that first meeting in the park, Isabel and I walked slowly through the mansion garden. It was a ritual we had established, a full lap, gradually increasing the distance each week. She used only a lightweight cane, more for security than real need. "Next month I start regular school," she said, with a tremor of nervousness in her voice. Until then, she had studied at home, with the same tutors who taught me. The idea of attending a regular school with other kids was both exciting and terrifying for her. "You're more than ready," I assured her, physically and in every other way. "I'm scared," she confessed. "What if the other kids think I'm strange? What if they laugh at the way I walk?" I stopped and looked at her directly. "Then they'll be fools, because the way you walk is the story of a battle you won. It's proof of your strength, not your weakness." Isabel smiled, her eyes shining with something beyond gratitude, something like deep understanding. "You always know what to say," she said, "as if you've lived several lives before this one." I laughed softly. Just one life, but intense enough to feel like several. We continued our walk, side by side under the soft afternoon sun, 2 girls whom fate had broken, and then, mysteriously, brought together to heal each other. "I think we're almost there," Isabel said suddenly. "There where?" "At the end of our story. The story of the girl who couldn't walk, and the girl who taught her how." I shook my head, smiling. "No, Isabel, we're not at the end. Just at the beginning of a much bigger story." And in that moment, under the golden sunset sky, with the gentle wind caressing our faces, I knew it was true. That all the pain, all the loss, all the moments of despair we had faced were just the prologue to something greater, more luminous, a story we would continue writing together, step by step, day by day. A story of healing, of redemption, of hope, our story. And so the years passed, unfolding like a colorful carpet beneath our feet. Mine, which had known the stones of the streets, and now trod on polished marble. Isabel's, which had awakened from a long sleep, to dance with life again. The girl from the park, Grace Miller, officially became Grace Harrison when the adoption was finally completed, a few months before my 10th birthday. It was a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by an intimate party at the mansion. A celebration not just of a legal document, but of a family reconstituted from broken fragments. 2 daughters, Mr. Harrison would say to anyone who would listen, with a pride he never tried to hide. "I have 2 extraordinary daughters." Isabel entered regular school as planned, facing the challenges with the same determination she had shown in her physical recovery. There were difficult moments, of course, curious stares, inconvenient questions, occasionally even teasing. But she had learned something deeper than simply walking. She had learned to stand firm in the face of adversity. I followed her a year later, when my education with tutors had advanced enough to put me at the same level as kids my age. It was a strange adjustment. The formal classroom, the rigid schedules, the constant interaction with other kids who didn't know my story, who saw me only as the other Harrison daughter. But both of us thrived, each in our own way. Isabel with her talent for music inherited from the mother she barely got to know. I with my growing passion for natural sciences and medicine, inspired by old Dr. Miller and strengthened by Dr. Thompson's lessons. Dr. Miller himself continued to be a constant presence in our lives. Mr. Harrison, in a gesture of reconciliation with the past, funded a small clinic in the neighborhood where the old doctor worked, allowing him to continue his work with the forgotten of society, but now with adequate resources and dignity. "See, Grace," the old doctor told me when the clinic was inaugurated, "this is how the wheel turns." The girl I helped walk helped another girl, who inspired her father to help many others who will come. This is how true healing spreads, not in a straight line, but in ever-widening circles. Those words stayed with me, guiding my choices as I grew. At 16, I knew with certainty what I wanted to do with my life. I would be a doctor, but not a common one. I wanted to combine rigorous scientific knowledge with the intuitive wisdom I had learned from my own scars. Mr. Harrison supported my decision without hesitation. "You were born for this," he said. "To heal, to reconnect what was broken." Isabel followed a different path, but equally passionate. Music became her refuge, her form of expression. At 18, she was already composing pieces that brought tears to people's eyes. Compositions that spoke of falling and rising, of darkness and light, of a body that dances again after the storm. I would listen to her play sometimes, late at night, when everyone else in the mansion was asleep. Sitting at the piano in the music room, her hands flew over the keys with the same freedom that her feet, once condemned to immobility, now traversed the world. And I thought about how similar we were, despite our different origins, both translating pain into something beautiful, both transforming limitations into bridges to other worlds. At 18, I entered medical school, determined to become the best of the two worlds that had shaped me, the scientific rigor of Dr. Thompson and the humanistic wisdom of Dr. Miller. I studied with fervor, absorbing knowledge, questioning dogmas, always seeking the connections between the physical body and that subtler force I had learned to recognize from such a young age. It was during my third year of medical school that Dr. Miller became seriously ill. At 87, his body was finally beginning to succumb to time, though his spirit remained as lively as ever. I visited him daily in the small house Mr. Harrison had bought for him near the clinic, a simple but comfortable place, filled with books, medicinal plants, and memories. "I'm not dying, Grace," he told me on a particularly beautiful afternoon as we watched the sunset from his porch. "I'm just changing form." I smiled through the tears I tried to hold back. "As always, you have a special way of seeing things." He took my hand, his now so fragile, mine strong and sure, a complete reversal from when we met. "Do you know what I'm most proud of about you?" he asked. I shook my head, awaiting his words. "That you never forgot where you came from. That despite all the comfort, all the education, all the privilege you gained, you never stopped seeing the people most prefer to ignore." It was true. Even living in the Harrison mansion, attending the best schools, wearing fine clothes, I never forgot the barefoot girl in the park. Regularly, I accompanied Dr. Miller on his visits to the poor neighborhoods, helping as I could, always learning. And when he became too weak to go, I continued alone, bringing not only medicine and medical knowledge, but also the deep understanding of someone who had been on the other side. Dr. Miller passed away peacefully on a spring morning, just after turning 88. His funeral was simple, as he would have wished, but remarkably diverse. Renowned doctors like Dr. Thompson, alongside homeless people, nurses from luxury hospitals, alongside traditional healers. A makeshift community, united by the impact a simple man, driven only by compassion, had made on so many different lives. "He saved you twice," Mr. Harrison told me during the ceremony. "First your legs, then your spirit. He saved all of us in some way," I replied. "Even you." Mr. Harrison nodded, understanding. The old doctor had been a bridge not only between my broken body and healing, but between all of us, people separated by chasms of class, education, and experience, but united by the universal need to heal, to belong, to find meaning. Dr. Miller's death marked the end of an era in my life, but also the beginning of another. I finished my medical degree with honors, specializing in neurology and rehabilitation. My thesis, a study on the integration of conventional techniques and holistic approaches in the treatment of spinal cord injuries, was published in renowned journals, causing both admiration and controversy in the medical field. "You're shaking things up," commented Dr. Thompson, who had become a reluctant but loyal mentor over the years. asking questions many would prefer not to hear. I learned from the best, I replied, referring to both him and Dr. Miller, two men so different, but who had shaped my vision of medicine and healing in complementary ways. Isabel, meanwhile, had become a recognized composer and pianist, her music touching people's hearts across the country. The scars of her past transformed into notes, into harmonies, into sonic stories that spoke of resilience and hope. Mr. Harrison, the man who had once been the relentless head of a corporate empire, had also transformed. Without completely abandoning his business, he redirected much of his energy and resources towards social causes, especially those aimed at abandoned children and rehabilitation programs. The Harrison Foundation, which he created on the 20th anniversary of the Park Miracle, as he called my meeting with Isabel, became one of the most important in the country in those areas. And at 30, I opened my own clinic, not in the wealthy neighborhoods where I could have made a fortune, but on the border between the two worlds I had inhabited, accessible to both the privileged and the forgotten. A clinic with state-of-the-art equipment, yes, but also with a medicinal herb garden in the back, with conventional doctors and physical therapists, but also with space for complementary practices, meditation, intuitive bodywork. The Crossroads Clinic, I called it, in silent tribute to Dr. Miller, who had taught me to navigate between different realities, different approaches, different forms of knowledge. Mr. Harrison and Isabel were by my side on opening day, my family, my foundation, my witnesses to the long journey from the park to there. "I'm proud of you," Mr. Harrison said, his hair now gray, his face marked by wrinkles that spoke of smiles as much as worries. More proud than I could ever express. Isabel, now an elegant 29-year-old woman with no visible trace of her former paralysis, except when she was particularly tired, hugged me for a long time. "You always said it wasn't the end of the story," she whispered. "You were right. It was just the beginning." The years continued to pass. My clinic prospered, not just financially, although Mr. Harrison insisted on subsidizing treatments for those who couldn't pay, but in the impact it had on people's lives. I developed new treatment protocols that combined the best of conventional medicine with the knowledge I had inherited from Dr. Miller, that I had learned through my own scars. I married at 35 to a neuroscientist I met at a medical conference, a man who, like me, sought bridges between different ways of understanding the human body and mind. We had 2 children who grew up hearing the story of the beggar girl and the girl in the wheelchair as their favorite bedtime fairy tale. Isabel also married to a musician who idolized her as much as he did me. Her compositions gained international recognition, taking her traveling the world, always returning to the Harrison Mansion, which remained the center of gravity for all of us. Mr. Harrison lived into his 80s, surprising everyone with his tenacity. In the last years of his life, he became more reflective, more open about the mistakes and regrets of his past. He wrote a book, part autobiography, part philosophical reflection, where he openly told the story of the accident that killed my parents, how he tried to cover it up, and the unexpected redemption that came when a small beggar appeared in a park promising a miracle. The Circles of Healing was the title he chose, echoing the words Dr. Miller had told me so many years before. The book became a surprising success, touching people from all walks of life with its brutal honesty and message of hope. When Mr. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at 83, the church where we held his funeral was full. Executives and homeless people, doctors and patients, musicians and listeners, all united by the impact a man, through his journey of redemption, had made on their lives. "He wasn't perfect," Isabel said in her eulogy. "He made terrible mistakes, like all of us, but he learned to use them not as anchors that tied him to the past, but as starting points for something better, something greater than himself." I looked at my sister as she spoke. Yes, my sister in spirit, if not in blood, and felt a wave of gratitude for the entire journey that had brought us there, for the girl in the wheelchair who had looked at me with hope that first afternoon in the park, for the man who, despite his initial distrust, had opened not just his house, but his heart to a street kid, for the old doctor who had taught me that healing is as much an art as a science. I looked at my own hands, now the hands of a 53-year-old woman, hands that had touched thousands of suffering bodies, that had written scientific articles and medical prescriptions, that had cradled my children and caressed my husband, hands that once had been covered in street dust, holding a small black stone while I promised a stranger, "I can make your daughter walk again." And now, at 78, those same hands are wrinkled with time, marked by decades of work and love. The Crossroads Clinic still exists, although I no longer actively manage it. My eldest daughter took over that role, continuing the legacy. Isabel, at 77, still plays the piano occasionally, although arthritis makes each performance an act of courage and determination. The Harrison mansion no longer exists as it was. We transformed the property into a rehabilitation center for children after Mr. Harrison's death, according to his wishes. But we kept a residential wing where we still live. I, when I'm not traveling, to give lectures or visit my grandchildren. Isabel, when she's not on charity concert tours. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, we sit in the garden that was once the setting for our first exercises. Two old women, one who once couldn't walk, the other who once had nowhere to go. And we laugh, remembering the barefoot girl who promised a miracle, and the girl in the wheelchair who had the courage to believe. "Do you think it was destiny?" Isabel asks me sometimes. "Do you think it was meant to be like this from the beginning?" And I always answer the same way, with the wisdom 78 years of life have granted me. I don't know if it was destiny or chance, dear. I just know that, somehow, two broken girls found a way to heal each other, and in the process, they healed everyone around them. Because that is the deepest truth I learned on my long journey from the park to here. True healing is never one way. When we heal others, we heal ourselves. When we receive help, we are also giving. When a hand is extended, be it the calloused hand of a little beggar or the pale hand of a privileged child, something sacred is manifested, something that transcends social classes, personal tragedies, accidents of fate, something that reminds us that, fundamentally, we are all broken in some way. And all of us, without exception, deserve the opportunity to get up and walk again, whether literally, like Isabel, or figuratively, like me, like Mr. Harrison, like all those whose lives intersected with ours over these years. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again," said that little beggar so many decades ago, with a conviction that didn't seem to belong to a street kid. And perhaps the real miracle wasn't just that the girl in the wheelchair walked again, but that all of us, the beggar, the millionaire, the paralyzed girl, found a way back to the shared humanity that had been stolen from us by different but equally brutal circumstances, a way back to hope, to redemption, to faith in the possibility of healing, even when all seems lost, a path we continue to walk, step by step, day by day, until today, two old women under an oak tree,